This is Look West, a podcast from California's Assembly Democrats.
Hi everyone, I'm Talitha de Mesa.
And I'm Armando Jimenez.
Welcome back to Look West, the podcast that brings you inside California's capital, where we explore the people, policies, and stories shaping our state.
So this year we have been focusing on the immigrant experience in California, some of the challenges, the triumphs, and the laws that can possibly impact everyday lives.
It's been a powerful journey so far, and we're just getting started.
In our last few episodes, we have heard from Assembly members Juan Carrillo, Liz Ortega, Esmeralda Soria, and Jose Luis Solache Jr. about their connections to immigration policy and some of the personal stories.
Today, we're continuing the series with a two-part episode. First, we'll hear from Assembly member Muratsuchi about his family's immigrant story and how it fueled his new legislation in Sacramento. Then, we'll take you to ABC Cafe in Monterey Park, where our colleague Henry Lowe sits down with Assembly member Mike Fong for an honest talk about identity, representation, and what it means to serve immigrant communities.
Hello, everyone. My name is Armando Jimenez with the Assembly DCO Look West podcast. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Assemblymember Muratsuchi. Thank you for being here today. And as you know, as we all know right now in California, ever since, especially the new administration has joined the United States, seems like there's been a lot of talks, a lot of conversations, a lot of media and press related to immigration, everything that's happening, the fear behind it, a lot of changes impacting a lot of people. So I kind of wanted to start kind of talking about the personal connections that we may have with immigration. I'll tell you a little bit about mine. Both my parents are from Mexico. I was born here, but I did chat with my mom a little bit growing up, a little bit about kind of her upbringing, the challenges she faced getting here, and then even when she was here, the challenges she's faced while she was here. I don't want to go too much in detail, but there's a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles. Thankfully, she overcame those with a lot of pain and suffering and trials, tribulations. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your family immigration story or background, Assembly member?
Yeah, well, thank you, Armando. I'm also a son of immigrants. My parents are from Japan. My mother was born in Japan. My father was born in Idaho, but went back to Japan when he was still a kid. And I was born and raised in the small island of Okinawa. My father worked for the U.S. Army as a civilian, and so I was born and raised in Okinawa. And so as a son of immigrants, I feel for what our immigrant families are going through now.
So, like, based on those, on some of those experiences, whether it was you or, like you said, your mother or father, how do you feel like that has influenced some of the work today that you're working on related to the immigrant community?
Mm-hmm. So I also teach at my local community college, El Camino College, and last fall I was teaching a class on American government, and we were following closely the presidential campaigns. And when Donald Trump was talking about how he was going to engage in this operation of mass deportations of undocumented immigrants, a number of my students, they came up to me and they shared their fear of their families being separated, of themselves being deported. And that was the beginning of my looking into this idea of trying to protect students in our schools that led to my bill that I introduced, the California Safe Haven Schools Act.
Awesome, which is AB 49.
That's correct.
Which we'll be touching on a little later.
Yeah.
And then back to the immigration, there's some misconception sometimes where people think it's only about a certain ethnicity, like, oh, it's only about, the Mexican immigrants, but it's not. It's more than that. It goes to all people from everywhere, different countries, all immigrants. So it's not only impacting the Mexican Americans or any people in that nature. It does impact everybody. And that there's also some confusion around a lot of different myths that we hear about immigrants. For example, there's sayings and conversations of, oh, well, immigrants don't pay taxes, but in reality, a lot of them are job creators. They are small business owners. What's some of those myths, or why do you think those myths even exist to begin with, like in our country?
Yeah, well, first of all, your first point about how a lot of people only think of, Mexicans or Latin Americans as undocumented, but, in the Asian American community, it's estimated up to 1 out of every 7 Asian immigrant is undocumented.
Wow.
And that's between 10 and 16%, 10 and 17% of Asian immigrants being estimated to be undocumented. And so, this issue of targeting immigrants, immigrant families, separation of families is certainly not just in the Latino communities. It's in the Asian American communities also. And as to your point about immigrants, contributing to our economy, I mean, I think California is a classic illustration of how our economy is built on the backs of immigrants, both documented and undocumented. What we've been seeing, in terms of the immigration rates and its impact, for example, on our agricultural industry, we're estimated up to half of all farm workers being undocumented.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the folks who are growing the food that we eat, and so that's just one of many examples of how California's economy, our daily lives rely upon the labor of our immigrants.
Yeah, and then especially with like you mentioned earlier, the fear in some of the students, the kids, the youth, and then parents, especially with this new administration that took office here recently. Have you noticed a difference, like in your district, in terms of like diversity? Have even some like jobs or employment decreased because of the fear of going to work and possibly getting deported? How do you feel like that's kind of changed in your district since this all happened?
Well, I certainly see and hear it more in the education space. As chair of the Assembly Education Committee, I talk with school districts throughout the state of California. So not just hearing it from my students at El Camino College, but hearing from school administrators throughout the state, but especially in communities with large immigrant populations. There's been a significant drop-off in school enrollment and school attendance, largely driven by the fear of immigration enforcement. And so, at the very least, we should be able to establish our schools as safe havens from immigration enforcement activity.
Yeah, and that's all really important. I think another big topic and that's really vital right now during this time is probably providing, having access to those resources for those that are undocumented or even have the fear of, something happening. The Assembly Democrats, along with yourself, came with the Know Your Rights campaign, which is providing and having access to like the Know Your Rights cards that are available. Do you mind talking a little bit about that and maybe some local outreach or support that maybe you and your office is doing? Like, is there any town halls? You already touched a little bit on AB 49, but is there anything else that you guys are working on in the district office?
So we work with the Los Angeles Unified School District, and as you know, LAUSD has actually seen attempts by immigration officials attempting to gain access to school property, and so it's these are real issues, and that's why I've been working closely with groups like the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights and others to make sure that we are educating our immigrant communities about what their rights are, so that because we know that we're not just talk about hypotheticals here. We're talking about something that is actually happening in our communities, including in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and I think some of the challenges, the ones that are undocumented or immigrants, I think one of the main issues is a lot of them might not speak English, So we do have those cards accessible in different languages. That way they do have access to those resources. And now it's time for the AB 49 legislation, which I personally want to, thank you, and I'm excited for this to hopefully go through this year. Do you mind talking a little about AB 49, how that bill came about, and I guess what impact do you hope this will have, both locally and statewide?
Yeah. So again, AB 49 came from my conversations with my community college students that expressed their fear about either personally being deported or their family members becoming separated. And as soon as it became clear that Donald Trump is going to be returning to the White House, and knowing full well that his Project 2025 was calling for these mass deportations, that I immediately got to work with my education committee staff, and that led to our introducing on the very first day of the legislative session Assembly Bill 49, the California Safe Haven Schools Act, which, among other things, provides guidance for school employees on how to deal with immigration enforcement authorities if and when they come knocking on the doors at our schools, to one, prohibit immigration enforcement officials from, and prohibit ICE from having access to our school grounds without a valid judicial warrant, and two, to limit their access to children in areas where there are no other children available, to try to or around, so that to try to minimize any traumatic impact that having ICE at their schools would have.
I know myself and other Californians are really excited for this bill. When I first heard it, I was excited. So thank you again, and hopefully it all goes well this year. Talk about a little bit of the challenges advancing some of those immigrant protections. Like, what are some of the biggest obstacles you as a legislator are facing at this time with these hot topics of immigration? And do you think it's like lack of funding that might prohibit some of these not going through? Is it time? Is it federal policy? Kind of, what's your take on that side of things?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is the fear-mongering campaign that the Trump administration has been, weaponizing. They are literally weaponizing fear and uncertainty in our immigrant communities with these actions, as well as the threats of mass deportations, of ICE officials knocking on their doors, hanging out around their schools, to try to target parents as they're dropping kids off at school. The goal of the bill is to make sure that children feel comfortable in coming to school, and for parents to feel comfortable in dropping their kids off at school. But this fear campaign is really the biggest challenge. Fortunately, according to surveys, most Americans do believe, and do support the longstanding policy that schools, again, should be safe havens. That regardless of how you feel about immigration and border security, that there should be safe haven locations like schools that should be off limits from ICE.
Yeah, I agree, and I know California is doing a lot of work. You, along with other members and other pieces of legislation. So California is often, I guess, looked at as a national leader when it comes to immigration. I think we're probably, if not the biggest, state with immigrants. Do you think other states can look west to California as a leader and model of these immigrant rights and protections? And what are the hopes, I guess, in the next 4 years during this new administration? I know we have some time, obviously 3 years left to go, just about. What are your hopes within these next 3 years during this challenging time?
Yeah, California, as the biggest state in the nation, as the state with the largest population of immigrants, it really comes down to states like California to provide hope for the rest of the country, and to set an example, compassion, for support for our immigrant communities. We need to lead in this time when the Trump administration is waging this campaign of fear, that we need to provide hope for our immigrant communities, that we're going to continue to support them, especially in these challenging times.
So, kind of touching back on the importance of the immigrants here in California, how much would you say they play a role into the impact on the economy here in California?
So California has recently become the fourth largest economy in the world. After the United States, China, and Germany, California, the state of California, by itself has a gross domestic product that is the fourth largest in the world. And not only are we the innovation economy, but we are, an economy that, again, is built on the backs of immigrant labor, whether it's our, nationally and globally leading agricultural industry, whether it's our high-tech industry. So much of the innovation is built on the backs of immigrant labor. And so, the nation should look west to the state of California for how we grow our, the world's fourth largest economy, working together rather than against our immigrant communities.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Assemblymember. Like you said, I think that's the model of, immigrants are California in a sense, for the most part. And I want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate all your hard work and legislation that you're putting and moving forward, and hope to chat with you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot.
So that was Assemblymember Muratsuchi sharing a deeply personal and powerful perspective on how his family's immigrant journey continues to shape his work in the legislature here in California.
Now let's head over to ABC Cafe in Monterey Park, where Henry Lowe sits down with Assemblymember Mike Fong for a conversation about leadership, legacy, and the power of connection.
California is a composite story of immigration from all over the world. In this case, immigrants arrive in California legally and otherwise from every part of the world. The immigration stories of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders are just as varied as the immigration stories of every other group coming here for a better life. Joining us to discuss their personal immigration stories, what the immigration communities in their districts are feeling, and what the legislature is doing to help our Assemblymember Mike Fong. Welcome, Assemblymember.
Thank you so much. Here in the San Gabriel Valley, here in District 49, we know that over half of our community is represented by immigrants, and many are children and grandchildren of immigrants as well. My family, my grandfather immigrated over from Guangdong province in China, Toisan area in 1923, and came over as a 13-year-old boy. Eventually worked in restaurants here in Los Angeles as a dishwasher, making 10 cents an hour, and eventually served in the United States Army. And through his service in the United States Army, was able to bring over my grandma in the 1946 time frame through the Congressional War Brides Act that allowed our Chinese American service members to bring over their significant others, to bring over their wives here to the United States. And so my mom was born in 48, and that's on my mom's side of the family. On my dad's side of the family, my grandma and my dad immigrated over to the United States in the early 50s when my dad was 2 or 3 years old, immigrated from China along with my grandma. And my grandfather on my dad's side was also a veteran in the U.S. Armed Forces and was able to bring over my grandma. And so I'm a product of my dad immigrating over, son of an immigrant family. My mom was born here in the States. And so both of my grandparents serving in the U.S. Armed Forces were able to bring over their wives, and that's part of the legacy of the 20,000 Chinese Americans that served in our United States Armed Forces during World War II, and I wouldn't be here today without my grandparents' service and coming over. And so when we look at immigration and we look at our family's history, it's so diverse and so varied among our communities, whether it's first generation, second generation, third generation, or even beyond. And so I'm very proud of my grandparents and my dad and my family for their leadership and experience here in Southern California. So.
No, thank you so much for sharing your family's history. In fact, I think that you and I probably share very similar backgrounds as well. Both my parents were also immigrants from Guangdong, China, and I think what I find fascinating, especially when we talk about our own stories or as stories of communities like Monterey Park that welcome immigrants, which is also the story of many communities in the San Gabriel Valley, is that over the decades, you see a infrastructure, a social and economic infrastructure that has developed to help these newcomers, these waves, to find housing, to find jobs, the children get enrolled in schools. And so the infrastructure is in place, and it's probably why you continue to see waves of people coming in. In fact, I should mention that today's Look West episode is being shot in a restaurant, which food is always a part of any culture, and so for Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Southeast Asian, it is no different. But also because oftentimes restaurants are the place of employment for many of these newcomers who are seeking work. And I know for my dad, he worked in a restaurant for many years. In fact, my dad held several jobs so that he could put food on a table and pay for a roof over our heads. But I think, what part of our discussion right now in this moment in time in our states and country's history is that, America and California has always been known as a place that welcomed immigrants. But unfortunately, we've seen the rhetoric from the federal government, from the White House, a shift that's more xenophobic, more anti-immigrant. And I think that for a lot of communities, there's a lot of concern about what does this mean moving forward for communities like the ones that are in the 49th district.
This is a very challenging time in our nation and also in Southern California, especially for our immigrant communities, our diverse immigrant communities. And here in Assembly District 49, where over half of the residents are immigrants, and we have a very large Asian immigrant population, a very large Latino immigrant population. We are a community of immigrants here in Monterey Park, here in the San Gabriel Valley, and with your leadership and efforts on the City of Monterey Park, with the community organizations that you have mentioned, to support our immigrants, it's important that we continue to uplift our diverse immigrant communities here in Monterey Park and the San Gabriel Valley. And in your comments, you also touched upon something earlier about the immigration from Chinatown to the San Gabriel Valley. And if I may add upon there just really briefly, my dad also worked in restaurants, worked at the Limehouse restaurant as a busboy in LA Chinatown, and that's the restaurant that was on Ord Street, which is now the ABC Seafood restaurant. They used to have the paper wrap chicken items there, but I remember my dad worked there for many, many years, and my grandfather on my dad's side also worked as a cook for a bit at different restaurants in Los Angeles. And so we know that those jobs in the restaurants provide a lot of opportunities for our diverse immigrant communities, especially in LA and then also here in the San Gabriel Valley. But to your question specifically about the federal administration and the challenges there, just recently, about 2 weeks ago, we hosted a listening session at the Alhambra Public Library to hear from local elected officials such as yourself, to hear from community leaders in the community about what these actions have impacted our local immigrant communities. And just for instance, the Chinatown Service Center, we heard from Peter Ng, the director and CEO of the Chinatown Service Center, who mentioned that over 25% of the appointments scheduled for medical appointments, healthcare appointments, folks have been missing those appointments. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when we look at what's happening here in the San Gabriel Valley, here in California. We know that we need to continue to do everything possible to support our diverse immigrant communities, our Asian American immigrant community, our Latino immigrant community. And you mentioned also some of the challenges also with recent immigration, with ICE enforcement, other actions that we've heard that may have happened throughout the San Gabriel Valley, including in El Monte, in Alhambra, and other areas. And these are challenging times that we need to continue to support our immigrant communities during these challenging times.
Right, and certainly they are challenging and concerning times, and and it's unfortunate to also hear that vital services provided by community-based organizations like the Chinatown Service Center have witnessed a drop in attendance about, you said 25%. And unfortunately, that is part of what we're seeing as this chill in our communities because of the rhetoric and actions coming from the federal government. What do you think right now, then, for Asian immigrants? What do you think will be most helpful, what they need right now to make sure that they feel less worried about their safety and security?
Absolutely, a great question. In terms of safety and security, we recently hosted a Know Your Rights workshop in partnership with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Southern California, and very grateful for their partnership there on that webinar. There we had hundreds of people online to learn about their rights, to learn about information and making sure that we protect our communities in these challenging times. And these Know Your Rights postcards were also made available. We've given them out in Chinese and in Spanish and in the community. We want to make sure that everyone's educated about their rights guaranteed by the Constitution, regardless of their immigration status. The right to remain silent if somebody comes to your door, the no need to open the door without a judicial warrant. And also, as the chair of the Asian American Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus, I've heard from my colleagues about uplifting immigrant communities as our top priority this year. And so during that town hall meeting, we had a listening session to hear about the challenges for many service providers that they're facing and trying to meet the needs of our community. And here in Monterey Park, I'm grateful for your leadership, and here specifically here at this region, and especially in your district here, that we're here at ABC Cafe and in this plaza here, which has been a landing place for many, many immigrants. And so we want to make sure that folks are not exploited, that they're safe, that they're being treated with respect. And also this year I'm also carrying a couple pieces of legislation that would support our diverse immigrant communities. One is Assembly Bill 695, which establishes a process for any students who happen to be deported, community college students, if they happen to be deported, that they're able to continue their education remotely. So that's something that we're advocating and pushing on as well. I've also carried a ACR 40, which expresses the legislature's intent to support our immigrant communities, regardless of their citizenship status, and to reaffirm the state's commitment to ensuring that all students, including our undocumented students, have access to financial aid opportunities and the ability to succeed in higher education.
Great. That's wonderful to hear about your leadership, Assemblymember Fong, as well as your colleagues on the Legislative API Caucus, to making sure that legislation is being pushed forward, again, to make sure that these residents, students, are not unfairly targeted. I think what's also interesting too is that for Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, that especially when there are periods of xenophobia, we also see the rise of anti-Asian hate, and I think that's a concern given the current climate that with this more heightened discussion about immigration crackdowns, that we could also see for APIs a rise in hate crimes.
You hit it on the dot exactly. That's with the rising tensions between the U.S. and China, the rising tensions around tariffs. These are issues that will lead to a rise in anti-Asian hate. I hope that we're able to keep our communities safe, and we are going to do everything we can to uplift our communities during these challenging times, to keep our communities safe. And we saw that during the COVID pandemic early on, with the rhetoric that was out there saying Kung flu and other issues, that we saw through a survey that 1 out of 3 residents in the San Gabriel Valley experience a form of anti-Asian hate or hate incident. And this is something that we need to continue to uplift and have our communities respond when these incidents happen, to make sure that the incidents are reported to local law enforcement, that we're able to track the data to make sure that we are looking at the rise in hate incidents, that we're responding to these incidents in a timely manner, but also providing bystander training, to provide intervention training. And that's through our partners at the local municipalities, also our partnerships with Advancing Justice and other local nonprofit organizations that are doing the work to uplift and to keep our communities safe. So this is something that we're going to continue to track very closely, and also working in collaboration with the Stop API Hate Coalition. The Stop API Hate Coalition recently had a reception in Sacramento to continue these efforts, but also to continue to work around birthright citizenship. And we know that Wong Kim Ark, a gentleman in the late 1890s, early 1900s, challenged. He came back here to the States and was being challenged on his citizenship status. And this case was supported by the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, or also known as the Chinese Six Companies in San Francisco, to really take this case all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court affirmed the right of birthright citizenship.
So in essence, it was a Chinese American that helped to establish birthright citizenship in the United States. And unfortunately, right now, there is, at least in rhetoric and possibly action by the Trump administration, to overturn birthright citizenship. And speaking a little bit more about this, I mean, is there anything that California can do to protect the birthright citizenships of those who are born now or in the future?
And in terms of affirming birthright citizenship, we do have a resolution with the API Legislative Caucus, as well with Senator Lee, and then also with a number of my colleagues in the API Legislative Caucus to affirm birthright citizenship. And also, Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco's Chinatown, and that San Francisco Chinatown is represented by Senator Haney, so working jointly with Senator Haney on this, and we had a joint press conference in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago to really, with the great-grandson of Wong Kim Ark, who was there to affirm his great-grandfather's legacy around birthright citizenship. And here in California, we're going to continue to make sure that immigrants are able to fully contribute and participate here in California. And we've had programs including the streamlining process of the California DREAM Act application for students to access financial aid opportunities, also on driver's license issues, on accessing medical health care through Medi-Cal. We know that immigrants work here in California, they pay taxes, and they contribute to the strength of our economy here in California.
So, Assemblymember, especially as you and your colleagues continue to do the work, what do you find are the political challenges, difficulties facing lawmakers in your efforts to help immigrants?
Great question. We know that it just anti-immigrant rhetoric that is out there now just creates definitely a much more hostile environment for our immigrant communities, our communities throughout California. But we know the blatant disregard that's coming from the federal administration makes it even more challenging for our immigrant communities to really be out here. And it's something that when we look at the deporting of a father with legal status to El Salvador, when we look at the cancellation of visas for our international students, when we look at defunding of the institutions because of the diversity initiatives, these are challenges for our immigrant communities and challenges for our state. And so this is something that in California we're going to continue to push back against to really support our immigrant communities, because we know that immigrant communities support the vitality of our communities, our economies, and lead to shared prosperity for all. And this is something that it's not an us versus them mentality. It should really be how we look at policies that support all communities here in California. And so this is something as a legislator, along with my colleagues, we're going to continue to support here in California during these very challenging times. And then also working with our Attorney General and the Department of Justice to really look at the constitutionality of a number of the executive directives that have come from the administration to push back and to file those lawsuits where we need to file those lawsuits, to look at the constitutionality of what's being proposed, what's being implemented, that we have those funds to partner with other states across the country. And that's something I'm grateful to Attorney General Rob Bonta and his leadership and his team for continuing to push back on a number of these executive directives that are coming down. We know that in the last Trump administration and Trump 1.0, that California was successful in the majority of the lawsuits. In fact, over nearly 3/4 of the lawsuits, I believe, that were filed. So this is something that as a state, we're going to continue to amplify and support our immigrant communities in these challenging times.
Thank you for saying that. And what I think the takeaway from what you just said is that there's actually a lot that California can do as a leader and show the way how for the rest of the country.
Absolutely. California is a state of immigrants, and we know that we have the strongest sanctuary state laws here in California, because you know that economies and communities will thrive when every member of society is able to participate. And here in California, with the recent allocation of $50 million in our special session, we're going to continue to support our immigrant communities, our legal services organizations, and other entities to really fight back against some of the number of the policies that are coming from the federal administration. We know California is the 5th largest economy in the world, but it's not without the support of our immigrant communities, our diverse immigrant communities, and the API community, Latino community, and many immigrant communities to do the hard work here in California. And I'm so grateful to Attorney General Rob Bonta for his leadership and efforts to continue to protect all immigrants, including our immigrant communities. And we know that in California, we're going to continue to lead the way here in our nation to support our immigrant communities, working closely with our legislative leaders and the governor. We're going to continue to support our diverse immigrant communities here in California to make sure that when we look to California, we look for our leadership here. This is something that this is very important to our diverse immigrant communities here, to my communities here in the District 49 and throughout Southern California and throughout California.
Thank you so very much, Assemblymember Fong, for coming to record today's episode of Look West. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much again. Really appreciate the opportunity here today, and thank you.
Big thanks to Assemblymember Mike Fong for that thoughtful conversation, and to my colleague Henry Lowe for guiding us through. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll hear from Assemblymember Celeste Rodriguez as she introduces her bill to help keep immigrant families together. And we'll also be traveling to the border with Assemblymember David Alvarez for a look at what immigration looks like from the ground level. Thanks for listening. I'm Talitha de Mesa.
And I'm Armando Jimenez with the Look West podcast. See you guys next time.
The Look West podcast is produced by the DCO Pod Squad for the California Assembly Democrats. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode. When you think of Californian politics, remember to look west.